and picking sort of specific examples of saying that this is somehow an anomaly overlooks, I think deliberately, all of the criteria which underpins the funding methods I've talked about.
Chris Elmore.
Benign, sir.
Secretary of State.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yes, it says here, Welsh products and services are some of the best in the world, from Welsh steel used to build Crossrail to Airbus's cybersecurity expertise to Raytheon in Broughton upgrading intelligence surveillance capabilities of our aircraft.
Chris Elmore.
Mr. Speaker, Wales is being denied billions in consequential funding for HS2. So does he agree for Wales to see any benefits from the scheme, which of course needs around 3 million tonnes of steel and new high-speed trains? The DfT should look to procure Welsh steel and indeed buy trains from my honourable friend, the member for Newport East constituency, in CAF, to ensure that Wales finally benefits from the project, or is it simply the Tories will continue to fail the people of Wales?
Well, no, John Gentleman actually raised a point which I have a lot to agree with. And I think if he looks at some of the projects we're talking, particularly around defence spending, £850 million worth of defence spending, the potential around floating offshore wind once the Crown Estate's leases are in play, the huge potential around nuclear development, he will see that actually domestic UK procurement of steel is actually right back on the agenda, and that will result in every steelmaker in Wales benefiting.
Simon Baines.
Number 10, please, Mr. Speaker.
UK government is Wales tourism's biggest fan, and the fact we have stepped up with financial help during the pandemic and saved thousands of jobs is a testament to that.
Simon Baines.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Tourism is of crucial importance to Clwyd South, which attracts visitors from all across the world for events like the Llangollen International Musical Eisteddfod, which is taking place this week. Would my right honourable friend join with me in condemning the Welsh Labour government's plans to introduce a tourism tax, which will do great damage to the tourism industry across the whole of Wales?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I think I can do even better than my honourable friend requests me to do by simply quoting the words of the Chief Exec of UK Hospitality, Kate Nichols, when she says, "The tourism tax is ill thought through and proposed without any impact assessment. Welsh Government does not know why it is needed, what its effect will be on visitors and what damage it will do to businesses and jobs in a sector making up a quarter of the Welsh economy. It is unnecessary, unhelpful and ill-considered." So if the House doesn't believe it from me, Mr. Speaker, they should believe it from the experts in this particular field.
Lynn Brennan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. On the issue of tourism in Wales, a previous Tory leader, when he resigned, actually not only visited Wales, but bought a home in Wales. Can I suggest that one way that the Secretary of State for Wales could help tourism in Wales is by encouraging the current Tory leader to follow suit, resign, and perhaps buy a home, maybe not in Wales, perhaps somewhere else.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Perhaps I could encourage the honourable gentleman to persuade his colleagues in Cardiff, the First Minister, to drop his ridiculous plans for a tourism tax, to drop his ridiculous plans for various other means of punishing successful businesses in Wales. And if he did that, actually, perhaps we could create some lasting jobs in Wales rather than simply listening to his political protestations.
Before we come to Prime Minister's questions, I would like to point out that the British Sign Language interpretation of proceedings is available to watch on Parliament Live TV. We now start with questions to Prime Minister. Ben Everett.
One, please, sir.
Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today is a big day as we implement the biggest tax cut. For a decade, increasing national insurance thresholds to make tax lower and the tax burden easier. These changes will benefit 30 million people across the UK. And I'm pleased to say that two of those people are seated here in the public gallery today. Mandy Banfield and Alan Calzari, a typical worker, will now save £330 per year, with 70% of employees better off as a result. That is real money for real people. Mr. Speaker, I'm sure the House will also join me in wishing the best of luck to England and Northern Ireland, who are competing in the UEFA Women's Euro 2022 tournament, which starts today, and I'm sure they will both make the nation proud. This morning, Mr. Speaker, I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I expect I shall have further such meetings later today.
Thank you, sir. Last week, we launched a new approach to combating knife crime in Milton Keynes, which means increased use of stop and search, it means tougher charging and custody, tougher sentencing, faster youth diversion, and more work with parents and communities. Would the Prime Minister agree with me that if you carry a knife in Milton Keynes, you should expect to end up behind bars?
Yes, I thank my honourable friend for what he's doing to campaign for tougher sentences in Milton Keynes, campaign against knife crime, and as a result of what the Conservatives have done, adults who are convicted of certain offences involving a knife, including threatening with a knife or a second offence of possession, face a minimum sentence of 6 months imprisonment, Mr. Speaker. And guess who voted against tougher sentences for knife crime?
We now come to the Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today is the start of the Women's Euros, and I know the whole House will wish the Lionesses the very best of luck in bringing football home. Mr. Speaker, it's also... Mr. Speaker, it's also been 40 years since the death of Terence Higgins. Terence worked at Hansard by day and Heaven by night before he sadly died of AIDS. The Labour Party and the Terence Higgins Trust are committed to ending new cases of HIV by 2030. Together we can. Mr. Speaker, last week a government minister was accused of sexually assaulting a young man. I want to quote the victim's account. He says, "He grabbed my arse and then he slowly moved his hand down in front of my groin. I froze." I accept that's not easy listening, but it's a reminder to all those propping up this Prime Minister just how serious the situation is. He knew the accused minister had previously committed predatory behaviour, but he promoted him to a position of power anyway. Why?
Prime Minister.
Individual, the member for Tamworth, no longer has the Conservative whip. He no longer has a job. He is no longer, as soon as I was made aware of the allegation that he has just read out, Mr. Speaker, and the complaint that was made, he lost his status as a Conservative MP, and he is now the subject, Mr. Speaker, of an independent investigation to the Complaints and Grievances panel. And that is entirely right. And I want to say to him, Mr. Speaker, I want to say to him that I abhor bullying and abuse of power anywhere in Parliament, in this party or in any other party.
Keir Starmer.
None of that explains why he promoted him in the first place. And we've heard it all before. We know who he really is. Before he was found out, he's reported to have said he's handsy. That's the problem. Pincher by name, pincher by nature. Now, has the Prime Minister ever said words to that effect? And I'm not asking for bluster and half-truth. We've all had enough of that. Yes or no?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'm not going to trivialise what happened. Yes, Mr. Speaker. Yes, Mr. Speaker, I'm not, because the very serious complaints have been raised against the member for Tamworth, and they're now being investigated, Mr. Speaker. It is true that a complaint was raised when he was in the Foreign Office, and the matter was resolved. It's absolutely true. It's absolutely true, Mr. Speaker, that it was raised with me. I greatly regret that he continued in office, and I've said that. I have said that before, Mr. Speaker. I have said that before, Mr. Speaker, but it is now the subject of an independent investigation. And that is the right thing, Mr. Speaker. And frankly, I think the people of this country would like also to hear about other jobs that are held by people in this country, not least the 500,000 people we got off welfare into work in the last 6 months alone, Mr. Speaker. Those are things that are making differences to the lives of people up and down the country, and I'm proud of it.
Keir Starmer.
No one's cheering that.
No denial. And he says the matter was resolved when he means it was upheld. Exactly. And they're all sitting there as if this is normal behaviour. Exactly. When that young man reported his attack to a government whip, she asked him if he was gay. When he said that he was, she replied, "That doesn't make it straightforward." That comment will sicken anyone who's experienced sexual assault and then be made to feel like they somehow asked for it, or who worry that prejudice means their complaint won't be taken seriously. Will he apologise for those disgraceful comments on behalf of his government?
Mr. Speaker, I've already said that I regret very much that the member for Tamworth continued to hold office after the complaint was made against him in the Foreign Office, and it was resolved in the Foreign Office. His apology was accepted, but clearly that was not enough. And in hindsight, Mr. Speaker, I should have realised that he would not change. However, when it came to the Friday of last week, and when I was given the information that he's read out about the complaint that was made against the honourable member, I acted immediately, Mr. Speaker, and I took the whip away from him. And we will not tolerate that kind of behaviour in this or any other party, Mr. Speaker. And what we also want to do is to help people up and down the country with the things that also matter to them, like cutting their taxes, Mr. Speaker, by £330 this year, which is what we're doing.
Keir Starmer.
Doesn't that just sum him up? Awful behaviour, unacceptable in any walk of life. It's there for all to see, but he ignores it. It was the same when his ally was on the take from the lobbyists. It was the same when his Home Secretary was bullying staff. It was the same when taxpayers' money was being abused. And it was the same when he and his mates parted their way through lockdown. Anyone quitting now, after defending all that, hasn't got a shred of integrity. Mr. Speaker, isn't this the first recorded case of the sinking ships fleeing the rat?
Mr. Speaker, look, he talks about. He should hear what his lot say about him, Mr. Speaker. He talks about integrity. He wanted to install the member for Islington North into number 10, Mr. Speaker. That's what he wanted to do. Imagine what our country and what the world will be like now. He talks about integrity. He voted 48 times to overturn the will of the British people and take us back into the European Union. And by the way, listening to his muddled speech the other day, that is exactly what he would do again. Mr. Speaker, he talks about integrity, but Mr. Speaker, he has voted time and time again against sanctions on criminals that would put them behind bars. This is the government that is tough on... I'm sorry, he talks about integrity. He is himself facing a criminal investigation, Mr. Speaker, which he asked me to resign.
Keir Starmer.
What a pathetic spectacle. Exactly. The dying act of his political career is to parrot that nonsense. Yep. And as for those who are left, only in office because no one else is prepared to debase themselves any longer, the charge of the lightweight brigade. Some self-respect. Mr. Speaker, for a week, he's had them defending his decision to promote a sexual predator. Every day, the lines he's forced them to take have been untrue. First, that he was unaware of any allegation. Untrue. Then, he was unaware of any specific allegation. Untrue. Then he was unaware of any serious specific allegation. And now he wants them to go out and say that he simply forgot that his whip was a sexual predator. Anyone with anything about them would be long gone from his front bench. In the middle of a crisis, doesn't the country deserve better than a Z-list cast of nodding doves?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, it's exactly when times are tough and when the country faces pressures on the economy and pressures on their budgets, Mr. Speaker, and when we have the biggest war in Europe for 80 years, Mr. Speaker, that is exactly the moment that you'd expect a government to continue with its work, not to walk away, Mr. Speaker, and to get on with our job and to focus on the things that matter to the people of this country. And so we're not only cutting taxes today, Mr. Speaker, we're putting £1,200 into every one of the 8 million most vulnerable households in the country, Mr. Speaker, thanks to the strength of our economy and thanks to the decisions that we took, Mr. Speaker, which he opposed at the time.
Keir Starmer.
The only thing he's delivering is chaos. I started this session with a quote from the young victim in all this, how he froze when he was attacked. When I was prosecuting rapists, I heard that from victims all the time. Victims said they froze because it's not about sex, it's about power. And the power the disgraced government minister had was handed to him by that Prime Minister. And he's only in power because he's been propped up for months by a corrupted party defending the indefensible. So it's no longer a case about swapping the person at the top. Isn't it clear? The only way the country can get the fresh start it deserves is by getting rid of the lot of them.
Mr. Speaker, the difference between this...
We've got to get through Prime Minister's questions. Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the difference between this government and that opposition is we have a plan and they do not. We're getting on with it. They want to focus on this type of issue, Mr. Speaker. We're going to get on with our jobs. We're going to control prices, Mr. Speaker, by not giving in to the union barons. They're paid by the union barons and they're proud of it. We were the first European country to arm the Ukrainians, Mr. Speaker. I'm proud of that. And those guys, Mr. Speaker, the party opposite, not only do they want to put Mr. Corbyn into number 10, the member for Islington North, but 8 of them, including the shadow foreign secretary, the shadow deputy leader, and 6 others, voted to get rid of our independent nuclear deterrent, Mr. Speaker. Today we are cutting taxes, we're helping 500,000 people into work, and thanks to the strength of our economy, we're helping people up and down the country, and we are going to continue to deliver on the mandate I was given.
Johnny Mercer.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. On Monday night, the Northern Ireland Legacy Bill reached its 3rd reading. And so with it, the beginning of the end of the journey, a long journey to make sure the service and sacrifice of those who served in Iraq, Afghanistan, and now Northern Ireland is not rewritten by those who seek only to line their own pockets. But would the Prime Minister agree with me that never again can we allow such a gulf to open up between this place and those who serve? Never again must they be made to feel like we are not on their side. And will he redouble his commitment to make sure this is the best country in the world, to serve in the military and be a veteran all their family?
Thanks, my honourable friend, very much. I thank you for all the work that he's done for veterans and continues to do. This bill will give veterans the certainty they deserve, and we're fulfilling the manifesto pledge to end the cycle of investigations, but also at the same time making sure that families can get the answers they need about what happened to their loved ones.
We now come to the Leader of the SNP, Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I give every best wish to the England and Northern Ireland ladies football team as they approach the Euro Championships. There's nothing better than seeing your teams in these finals. Can we also commemorate the passing 40 years ago of Terence Higgins and all those that have died from AIDS and sin? And I'm sure, Mr. Speaker, the whole House will want to join with me in passing condolences to the family of friends of the Scottish football goalkeeping legend, Andy Gorham, who sadly passed far too early last weekend. He will long live in the memory of the best goalkeeper that many of us have seen. Mr. Speaker, It's easy to forget that only 10 days ago, the Prime Minister was dreaming of a third term. Mr Speaker, you know, it's often said that a week is a long time in politics, but it turns out that 10 days is truly a lifetime. Because, let's face it, it's a minor miracle that the Prime Minister has even made it through to Prime Minister's questions, and he really ought to see the faces behind him, because, Prime Minister, it really is over. The Prime Minister is desperately clinging on to his own fantasy, but the public can't afford to put up with this farce of a government a minute longer. Today, we should be talking about the Tory cost of living crisis, soaring inflation and the growing cost of Brexit. But instead, it's always about him. How many more ministers need to quit before he finally picks up his pen and writes his own resignation letter? Perhaps that's what he's doing now.
Actually, Mr. Speaker, I was just jotting down some notes on his question, which I thought was excellent when he was talking about the economy, because that is the issue that the country faces, and that is where this government is introducing, I think, the most important solution. Helping families up and down the country with £1,200 going into their bank accounts right now, cutting taxes for 30 million people, £330 tax cut, and helping 500,000 people into work through the Way to Work scheme. That is a fantastic thing to be getting on and doing. That is the priority of this government, and that's what I'm going to focus on. I'm glad he likes it.
Ian Blackford.
My goodness. Nothing to see. We should all move on if we live in the world of the Prime Minister. You know, a few weeks ago I compared the Prime Minister to Monty Python's Black Knight. Actually, turns out I was wrong. He's actually the dead parrot. Whether he knows it or not, he's now an ex-Prime Minister. But he will leave behind two deeply damaging legacies. I hope the dishonesty of his leadership follows him out of the Downing Street door. But the other legacy is that of Brexit. And that will stay, because I'm sad to say that the Labour Party now fully supports Brexit. Mr Speaker, Scotland wants a different future, not just a different Prime Minister. So if the Prime Minister won't resign, will he call a general election and allow Scotland the choice of an independent future, free from the control of Westminster?
Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, I noticed that his remark that the Labour Party have given up on returning to the European Union was not greeted with rapture by the benches opposite, and that's because it's not true. They want to go back in just as he does. I think that is a terrible mistake. It would be anti-democratic, Mr Speaker. And as for the referendum that he wants, well, we had one of them, as I've told him before, in 2014.
Come on.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Does the Prime Minister think there are any circumstances in which he should resign?
I think, Mr Speaker, clearly if there were circumstances in which I felt it was impossible for the government to go on and discharge the mandate that we've been given, or if I felt, for instance, that we were being frustrated in our desire to support the Ukrainian people, or over some major point, then I would. But frankly, Mr Speaker, the job of a Prime Minister in difficult circumstances when he's been handed a colossal mandate is to keep going, and that's what I'm going to do.
Ms Savile Roberts.
Well, there you have it, Mr Speaker. Once again, the Prime Minister, he puts political survival before public duty. But people can see, even if he goes, it's not an if, it's a when, isn't it? The same Westminster arrogance will continue to dictate our futures in Wales. Does he want a medal for being the best recruiting sergeant for independence we could wish for?
Actually, Mr Speaker, everywhere I look around the United Kingdom, I had a great talk with Mark Drakeford the other day, as well as talking to Nicola Sturgeon. I see the bonds of our union being strengthened the whole time, and I'm confident that they will continue to do so.
Link Drummond.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr Speaker. The government's town centre and levelling up funds have been very successful around the country, but there are a few town centres, like Waterlooville in Mearn Valley, that are in desperate straits and haven't managed to get any funding, get a scheme into the present round of funding. Can my honourable friend assure me that future funds will be available to help declining high streets become fit for the 21st century and survive the post-pandemic?
Yeah. I thank my honourable friend, and she's a great champion for Mearn Valley, and I will make sure that she gets a meeting with the Minister for Levelling Up at the earliest opportunity.
Western.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The public clearly thinks that this government has lost the plot over the cost of living crisis. The Prime Minister may be aware that the average salary for a nurse is £36,000. For a primary teacher, it is £38,000. They, and indeed working people everywhere, are struggling to pay their rents and their mortgages. Given they can barely afford a £150,000 mortgage on a new home, can he tell this House how he could afford a £150,000 treehouse?
What I can tell him, Mr. Speaker, is that up and down the country, rather than talking about fantasy infrastructure, I can talk about real infrastructure. We are helping to unite and level up the people of this country with £650 billion of investment, helping people, helping to lift the aspirations and opportunities of people up and down the country. And thanks to the strength of our economy, we're helping exactly the people he describes with £1,200 going into their bank accounts to help them with the cost of living pressures.
Under the House, Peter Bottomley.
The Prime Minister knows that while he's Prime Minister, I want him to do all the good he can. While he's Prime Minister's Green and Present Land, can I refer him to EDM 1082 about the Goring Gap, the Chatsmore Farm, or to the Department of Levelling Up, the land above Goring Station, the farm in Worthing, which was fully protected and will be fully protected when another inspector says that the Worthing Council protecting it will happen. Can I ask him to tell the government to withdraw their objection to Worthing Council's appeal against the absurd decision by a planning inspector to allow 482 homes to go on this green lung between Goring and Ferry?
Minister.
I thank the Right Honourable Gentleman very much, and he campaigns on this issue for some time. I will make sure that he gets a meeting with the relevant minister to discuss the development in Goring by sea.
Ian Legray.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On the 21st of January, the government committed £100 million from the Automotive Transformation Fund to British Wool, to a gigafactory in my constituency, Calais, Warnsbeck. And as of today, Prime Minister, not a penny, not a single halfpenny is being received by the company. And it jeopardises up to 8,000 much-needed jobs. The tensions between the Prime Minister and the former Chancellor have sadly now been much exposed. And I'm telling you, Prime Minister, the betrayal of my constituents cannot be another broken promise of this government. Prime Minister, give them a nudge. Please instruct your new bestie to make sure that the cheque is in the post this afternoon, because who knows who'll be in that seat this time this afternoon, never mind next week.
Can I congratulate the honourable gentleman on the passion with which he advocates investment in British folk? And I totally share his enthusiasm. And actually, I want to thank my honourable friend, the member for Blythe Valley as well, who is a heroic campaigner on this issue. I can tell him that the letter was sent last night, Mr. Speaker, an in-principle offer of support for this project through. How about that? Hang on in there, Mr. Speaker. That's what I'm going to do.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The world is facing a global food crisis in which the poorest nations face catastrophic consequences. Will the Prime Minister take all possible action to negotiate and facilitate access to the grain stores stranded in Ukraine? We have a limited opportunity to avert famine in developing nations, and the UK must play its full part using all the resources at our disposal.
My right honourable friend is completely right, and there are 25 million tonnes of wheat that are basically being held hostage by Putin. That's equivalent to the annual consumption of many of the least developed countries, and we're helping to lift that blockade, not just by negotiation, but also by supplying demining equipment, insurance for the commercial ships that might be involved, and also 10 million to help improve the railway infrastructure that would be necessary to get the grain out by rail.
Mark Hendry.
Mr Speaker, yesterday the Prime Minister said that he is fed up of people saying things on his behalf. It's not just him that's fed up, so are the British people and his ministers who are resigning. They're sick of time and time again being sent out by him to say things that aren't true. Is the real problem him or them for believing him in the first place?
Mr Speaker, I thank him very much, and look, I want to be clear. What I want to say is, I say it again, I regret the way the appointment happened, and I was clear with the House about what I knew at the time, but I want to stress that I take this matter extremely seriously. I'm very sorry for the impact it's had on the victims, but the individual in question, the member for Tamworth, is now subject to an independent complaints and grievance procedure. As soon as that complaint was made, I should say, Mr. Speaker, the whip was taken away.
Can I just say, we don't know that is the case. It is confidential, and I think we've got to stop referring to something that we don't know there. And I want to put the House on notice that we don't mention it. Teresa Villiers.
Just over a fortnight ago, 2 horrific fatal stabbings took place in a quiet street in East Barnet. With the Metropolitan Police now in special measures for the first time in its history, will the Prime Minister urge the Mayor of London to start living up to his responsibilities as Commissioner? The Mayor needs to get a grip on crime, he needs to give Barnet its fair share of new officers, and he needs to abandon his plans to sell Barnet police stations.
Well, I do notice, Mr Speaker, that crime has spiked since the previous Mayor of London, and it is the Labour Party that voted against stop and search, Mr Speaker, that voted against increased funding for the police. And I think, as for the Labour Mayor, he'd do better to get out of California and take control of crime in his city.
And this will alter.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. According to the NHS Confederation, not a single one of the so-called 40 new hospitals the Prime Minister promised at the last election will be built by 2024. 2 of those new hospitals are in my constituency. Hammersmith opened in 1902 and Charing Cross opened in 1818. They're not new hospitals, and there's no building going on. Like all his promises, they exist only in his warped imagination, as this is likely to be his last Prime Minister's questions. Will he finally tell us the truth?
Well, actually, Mr Speaker, if he looks at what we promised and what we delivered, we said we'd get 20,000 police out on the streets. We've actually got 13,500 more already. We said we'd do 50,000 more nurses. We're already on track. And he's quite wrong about the pledge on hospitals. We're going to deliver them by 2030, Mr Speaker. That was always clear. And the only reason we can do that is because we're putting the funding into our NHS, which he and his party opposed.
Gary Sambrell.
Mr Speaker. Yesterday, in an attempt to boost morale in the tea room, the Prime Minister said at a table, but there were 7 people, MPs in the Carlton Club last week, and one of them should have tried to intervene to stop Chris from drinking so much. As if that wasn't insulting enough to the people who did try and intervene that night, and then also to the victims that drink was the problem. Isn't it the example, Mr Speaker, but as the Prime Minister constantly tries to deflect from the issue, always tries to blame other people for mistakes, and that at least nothing left for him to do other than to take responsibility and resign.
Order. Can I just say, you ought to be embarrassed by clapping. This is not a debate. Mr Esterson, it's not debating society. This is... This is Prime Minister's questions. I want to get through the questions. There's other people who want to catch my eye, and the way to do it is not by clapping. Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, there's a very simple reason why they want me out, and that is because. And that is because they know, Mr. Speaker, that otherwise we are going to get on and deliver our mandate and win another general election. And that is the reality, Mr. Speaker.
Wilson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister once wrote, "It is a wonderful and necessary fact of political biology that we never know when our time is up. Long after it is obvious to everyone that we are goners, we continue to believe our duty is to hang on to the perks and privileges of our posts. In reality, we are just terrified of the come down." Yep. So for the sake of this great country, will the Prime Minister heed the advice of his former self, get over his terror and do the decent thing?
Mr. Speaker, with great respect, I refer the honourable lady to the answer I have just given. When things are tough, of course people turn their fire on the leader of the country, but it is my job to get on and deliver our manifesto, which we are, and to deliver on the mandate on which I was elected, and to get this country through tough times, just as we got it through COVID. And that is what I'm going to do.
Fiona Bruce.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Around 1,000, I apologise, around 1,000 delegates from 100 countries are at the Freedom of Religion or Belief International Ministerial Conference over at the QE2 Centre today. There is still time for honourable members to visit. But will the Prime Minister agree with me that this significant conference will count for nothing unless it results in concerted global action to promote and protect freedom of religion or belief around the world?
I thank her very much. And freedom of religion and belief is integral to people's identity and their sense of themselves and their own personal freedom and security. And I thank her for the work she's doing as my own envoy on that subject, and also for the wonderful conference that she has organised. It was great to talk to her about it yesterday.
Mohammed Jasser.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Will the Prime Minister join me in expressing my deepest condolences to those injured and affected by the explosion at a block of flats at Redwood Grove in Bedford on Monday, which has sadly led to the death of one resident, with others yet to be accounted for. This is a timely reminder of the dangerous work undertaken by the fire service. So will the Prime Minister join me in praising the emergency services who were at the scene, and also reconsider his 2% pay offer when firefighters have endured a real terms pay cuts of 12% over the last decade?
I thank him very much, and and I share very much his support for the firefighters of our country. They do an incredible job, and overall it's a testament to their work that deaths from fire over a long period have on average been decreasing, thanks to the work that they put in. We will do our best to look at the public sector pay review body offer and do our best to fund them as much as we can, but everybody knows the inflationary pressures that this country is now under. We don't want to have pay increases that are simply swallowed by price increases.
David Johnson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The North Morton in my constituency was dubbed Britain's kindest village because this 160, wait for it, because this 160 home village committed to take 50 Ukrainian refugees. It has them all with them now. In the gallery today, there is a group of those hosts and some of the Ukrainians that they are hosting, including 2 young people who hope to go into Ukrainian politics in the future. Will my right honourable friend join me in welcoming them to this place and in thanking North Morton for their efforts?
I thank him very much for what he's doing to host young Ukrainians. Thank everybody actually in this House who's looking after Ukrainians. I think a lot of people are doing that. And can I say, I believe it's the wish of this entire House that those young people should grow up to live in a free, independent, democratic and sovereign Ukraine.
Peter Dowd.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Given that the Prime Minister doesn't like walkouts and strikes, what legislation will he be introducing to stop further walkouts and strikes amongst his cabinet colleagues and junior ministers?
Mr. Speaker, I think that the whole House will have observed the brilliant performance on the radio this morning by the new Chancellor of the of the Exchequer. And that's no disrespect to the former Chancellor of the Exchequer, but what I think it shows, Mr. Speaker, is that in common with many sectors of the UK economy, there is a ready supply of skilled labour in the upper reaches of the Conservative Party.
David Davis. Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to draw the Prime Minister's attention to the words he used in response to my right honourable friend, the member for Worthing, when he asked the question earlier. 6 months ago, I called on the Prime Minister to resign because even then it was clear that his approach to leadership and integrity was already creating a pipeline of problems that would paralyse proper government. Today, I ask him to do the honourable thing, to put the interests of the nation before his own interests, and before, in his own words, it does become impossible for government to do its job.
Prime Minister.
I thank him very much for the point that he's made again. I've just got to, I just couldn't disagree with him more. Look at what the government is doing today. Cutting taxes for 30 million people. We've just completed a programme to get 500,000 people off welfare into work, Mr. Speaker. And thanks to the strength of our economy, thanks to the position that we're now in, which was because of decisions that we took that they opposed. And it's to never forget, we are able to give £1,200 to 8 million of the poorest and most vulnerable families in this country. That is the right thing to do. We're getting on with it, and we will continue for the benefit of this country, uniting and levelling up and unleashing the prosperity of the entire nation.
Final question, Clive Betts.
The Local Government Association has told us that over 400 families who've come to this country from Ukraine under the family scheme have subsequently presented themselves as homeless to local authorities. Because the local authorities haven't got enough accommodation, those people are going to end up in temporary accommodation. There's a simple answer. Local authorities could be allowed to contact the many thousands of people who volunteered to provide homes under the Homes for Ukraine scheme. The problem is the government doesn't allow families to transfer from the family scheme to the home scheme. When will the Prime Minister act to ensure people who've come thousands of miles to this country aren't placed in temporary accommodation, but we take on the generosity of those families who are willing to offer them a home?
I thank you very much for the very valuable point that he's raised, and we will make sure that families are able to cross over from one scheme to another and to simplify and speed up the process. But I don't think that should take away, Mr. Speaker, from the generosity of this country in welcoming Ukrainians. 135,000 visas have so far been issued through our uncapped scheme, both the family scheme and the Homes for Ukraine scheme. It's changing the lives of those Ukrainians, and I think we should all be proud of what we are doing.
We now come to the personal statement. I call Sajid Javid.
Mr. Speaker, I'm grateful for your permission to make this statement. Yesterday, we began our day together. You, I, my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, and members from right across this House, when we broke bread together at the Parliamentary Prayer Breakfast. And we listened, all of us, to the words of Reverend Les Isaac, who spoke about the fact that responsibility that comes with leadership, the responsibility to serve the interests of others above your own, and to seek common ground of your party, your community, and above all, your country. Now, colleagues will be forgiven for my sense of déjà vu. Despite what it might seem, I am not one of life's quitters. I didn't quit when I was told that boys like me don't do maths. I didn't quit when old school bankers said I didn't have the right school ties. And I didn't quit when people in my community said that I should not marry the love of my life. I care deeply about public service and giving back to this country that has given me so much. That is why, when I got the call from my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, just over a year ago, I didn't hesitate to serve again. It was a critical time for our country. Tough decisions needed to be made about when we were going to come out of lockdown, about supporting the National Health Service and the care sector under unprecedented strain. It has been an absolute privilege of my life to have been trusted with these responsibilities, and I can only hope that my best has been good enough. It has undoubtedly also been one of the toughest roles that I've had so far. The gravity of Home Office decisions, the scale of Treasury decisions, but nothing matters more than the health of your people, of the British people, especially and in the wake of a pandemic. Caring for people's health and well-being is truly a noble vocation. And so I would like to take this opportunity to pay tribute to all of those across the country working in health and care sectors, as well as those that I worked so closely with in my old department, DHSC, and in the NHS. There is so much that I planned for the long-term reform of our health and care systems, and it is a wrench to leave that important work behind. Now, when I last gave a personal statement from this seat, I spoke about the importance of institutions and conventions. Today, it is about the importance of integrity. And don't worry, there's not going to be a series of these. Institutions and integrity are both central pillars that underpin our great democracy. It doesn't matter what your political perspective is in this House. I believe that we are all motivated by the national interest, and that the public expects us all of us, to maintain honesty and to maintain integrity in whatever we do. This is not an abstract matter. We've seen in great democracies what happens when divisions are entrenched and not bridged. We cannot allow that to happen here. We must bring the country together as one nation. Effective governance inevitably requires loyalty and collective responsibility. Of course it does. And I'm instinctively a team player. And I have completely focused on governing effectively over the last year. But treading the tightrope between loyalty and integrity has become impossible in recent months. And, Mr. Speaker, I will never risk losing my integrity. I also believe a team is as good as its team captain, and that a captain is as good as his or her team. So loyalty must go both ways. The events of recent months have made it increasingly difficult to be in that team. It's not fair on ministerial colleagues to go out every morning defending lines that don't stand up and don't hold up. It's not fair on my parliamentary colleagues who bear the brunt of constituents' dismay in their inboxes and on their doorsteps in recent elections. And it's not fair on Conservative members and voters who rightly expect better standards from the party they supported. When the first stories of parties in Downing Street emerged late last year, I was personally assured at the most senior level by my right honourable friend's then team that, and I quote, there had been no parties in Downing Street and no rules were broken. So I gave the benefit of doubt. And I went on those media rounds to say that I'd had those assurances from the most senior level of the Prime Minister's team. Then we had more stories. We had the Sue Gray report, a new Downing Street team. I continued to give the benefit of the doubt. And now this week again, we have reason to question the truth and integrity of what we've all been told. And at some point, we have to conclude that enough is enough. I believe that point is now. I welcome the Prime Minister's public acknowledgement last night that matters could have been handled better in who he appointed and what was said about what he knew when. And I appreciated his kind and humble words and his humble spirit when I went to see him yesterday, and also the kind letter that he has sent to me. But I do fear that the reset button can only work so many times. There's only so many times you can turn that machine on and off before you realise that something is fundamentally wrong. Last month, I gave the benefit of doubt one last time. But I haven't concluded that the problem starts at the top. That is not going to change. I have concluded that the problem starts at the top, and I believe that is not going to change. And that means that it is for those of us in a position who have responsibility to make that change. I wish my Cabinet colleagues well, and I can see they have decided to remain in the Cabinet. They will have their own reasons. But it is a choice. I know just how difficult that choice is. But let's be clear, not doing something is an active decision. I am deeply concerned about how the next generation will see the Conservative Party on our current course. Our reputation, after 12 years in government, depends on regaining the public's trust. This is not just a personal matter. The philosophy and perception of Conservatives depends on it. It is central to the Conservative ideal that we believe in decency, in personal responsibility, and in social justice enabled by conventions and the rule of law. The Conservative mission to extend freedom and prosperity and opportunity is all at risk if we cannot uphold that ideal. And, Mr. Speaker, it is not only the Conservative Party is not the only great institution in need of urgent repair. Like everyone in this House, I've been dismayed by the drip of stories of harassment and worse by members of this House. So I'm also concerned about how the next generation will see this House and the health of our democracy. In recent years, trust in our roles has been undermined through a series of scandals. But the one thing we can control is our own values and behaviours. So it is incumbent on all of us to set high standards for ourselves and to take action when they are not met by others. Mr. Speaker, I'm grateful for the messages of support that I've had from many members of this House and beyond. I got into politics to do something, not to be somebody. So it is hard in one way, but not in another. Being a good father, a husband, a son, and a citizen is good enough for me. And if I can continue to contribute to public life and my party from the backbenches, it will be a privilege to do so.
Can I say to the House, there will be no more personal statements today. Let the House leave in peace and quiet.